to begin the discussion, I'd love to start with you, Achim, if you don't mind, to set the scene, if you like, regarding the opportunities and challenges that policymakers around the world are facing when it comes to labor markets.
Sure thing. Thank you very much, Mustafa, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I think we need to recognize that this is really a time of, in a way, unprecedented challenges, but then also huge opportunities for labor markets. Just to list some of the challenges, some of the mega trends that are affecting all of us and our work as policymakers, but also as people who are active on the labor market to kind of set the stage. The first one is digitization, automation, which we've been talking about for a few years, but really with generative AI is gaining new speed and impacting labor markets. Second, we have climate change, which offers both lots of opportunities in terms of green jobs, but also means that there is a transition out of brown jobs that needs to be managed. Demographics is something that's oftentimes overlooked, but extremely important. Some countries are aging, others, like in this region, are still very young, and the question is, where do we find the jobs for all the young people? Then there's still COVID-19, which has affected many workers, and where there are long-term scarring effects. And finally, we see geopolitical uncertainty, upheaval in many regions of the world, and that leads to migration and also to other impacts on the labor market. So really, one might think a perfect storm, but again, also something that presents a lot of opportunities. To maybe also frame the discussion, just to mention three broad areas of policy, and we might go a little bit more into these as we continue the discussion. I think the first one is really about preparing the workers for this transition. This is the whole upskilling, reskilling conversation, which needs to start with basic education, even pre-primary education, and then go all throughout the life cycle. The second is the agenda of protecting workers, expanding, enhancing, strengthening social protection systems, making sure they're inclusive for everyone, including those in more traditional employee-driven types of work relationships, but also new gig economy workers, those in the informal economy, and migrant workers. And finally, we need to make sure labor markets are flexible so that we can actually make this transition work, don't get stuck in old ways of thinking, which requires labor policies that enable this. And again, it's something that's important both for domestic labor markets, but then also internationally, so that we can make sure that talent actually can flow where it can be most productive and can contribute to development.
Thanks, Achim. I'm going to come to you in a moment, Mahuran, to sort of share the experience from Malaysia, from that important region. Some of the trends that Achim was talking about, including AI and making jobs for young people, but also ensuring that older people can be upskilled and continue to be educated for their opportunities that will impact across regions. But if we come back to Malaysia specifically, what can you tell us of the experience of constructing your own labor markets there and how it's been?
Okay, thank you. Hi, Excellency. Okay, to answer the questions that how we go to the talent gaps, I believe that many countries are experiencing the gaps. Yeah, the skills gap and competency gap of the labor market with the offered, what we offered by the workforce. So the type of the competency, as you can see, Malaysians also experience based on the World Economic Forums, some of the skills, competencies that are, rise in the important is talking about the AI thing, talking about the machine learning, talking about the digital transformation. Okay, so this is all related to all the technical skills. And if we go to the soft skill, same, we also experience on the problem solving, creative thinking, all those. So that's where we believe that the modeling of the projection of the skill competency, okay, is very important to address these matters so that the government can work together closely with the private and produce, the correct, I would say, the skills competency needed by the industry. So that's my answer to that.
Thank you. Government and private sector working together. Malaysia obviously has its own unique characteristics, a highly skilled population, not necessarily an over-reliance on foreign talent, even though, as you say, there are always skill gaps. But that experience isn't necessarily shared around the world, and Malaysia, as a result, will have its own successes regarding that. But Jason, if I kind of turn to you to give your thoughts on what some of the experiences are in various regions regarding labor markets and some of the issues that that Ahim and Mahuran have spoken about already?
Yeah, thanks so much, Mustafa. That's obviously a very good question. I want to pick up a little bit on what the others said. There's many numbers being bandied around the job demands that related to all these transitions that Achim mentioned earlier. One of those numbers is, they're all astounding. They all go in the same direction. There's 85 million people by 2030 that'll be in shortage globally. 7 million of those will be in the green economy, or something that could be termed the green economy, that have to do with the climate change and environmental trends that Achim mentioned earlier. And so there's many things that need to change in the labor market. And one of those things that can be easily done is reaching out to different stakeholders that different than what we're doing now. And they have to do with the education systems and the education monitoring programs, but also other stakeholders like the private sector. So the linkages between the two are very important. 3 points. The first is, given everything that Achim mentioned at the beginning, we need constant monitoring about the supply and the demand sides of everything that's changing. They're changing so fast that the shortages are almost changing on a yearly basis. And then connecting these to larger national development strategies and priorities, thinking where do we want to be in 10, 20, 30 years, not just in a year time, so that when you do that, it's connected to different line ministries, different stakeholders across the economy. The second is, and I'm sure my UN Women colleagues in here will agree with me on this. I think we're not doing enough to get women in the right jobs, valued for the skills that they bring. Many more women are getting into the right fields that are in demand at the moment, but those aren't translating to the same quality jobs that are available in these areas. And the last thing is, and it's been mentioned already, look outside. Changing the education systems is not going to be a short-term fix. These are things that might be fixed in 10 years' time. So looking outside, but that requires a number of different stakeholders to calibrate the migration systems, make the country attractive, make them attractive, changing the pension systems, for instance, so they're portable, making families be able to come with them, making spouses be able to work. All of these things are obviously very important, calibrating the credential systems, for instance.
As I listen to all of you, I can't help but wonder, how are we doing? I mean, like, what is the assessment of how countries are doing in terms of labor markets? I mean, how would you grade us, Achim, if you had to, for example?
That's a tough question, Mustafa. I would say if we really look globally, one thing we do see right now, actually there's never been as many jobs as there are right now. So in the grand scheme of things, it's not that we are running out of jobs at this moment. Maybe eventually we will, and I think that's one of the big fears about AI. Will at some point AI be better at every single jobs than what we as humans can do? And maybe we need to prepare for that and really think outside the box. For instance, what does that mean for our societies, for social protection, for also just like giving value and meaning to people's lives. But so far, we are not there yet. I think the challenge is more that we don't have jobs of the right quality, and that jobs are not always inclusive, that some groups are having a harder time. Jason already mentioned women, which I think are very important. We also see in some places minorities, indigenous populations, people with disabilities, other groups that are really challenging. So I think it is not so much in the aggregate, in terms of the number of jobs, we are still doing fine. It's about the quality of jobs, it's about being inclusive. And there, maybe B- at this point.
That's not bad. Would you agree, Jason, on the B-?
Obviously, I agree with everything Achim said. I add a couple of other things. One is, someone mentioned it earlier, this idea of transversal skills and soft skills being important. You learn a lot of these on the job, but I think there's something to be done about trying to integrate those directly into the education system and trying to mimic more of a system that looks at what it would actually, the demands of skills that will be in demand in the labor market. The other one is, it was mentioned earlier that we're transiting into something, but we're also transiting out of something. And transiting out of brown jobs means that we're going to have to reskill a lot of people. And we're going to have to deal with the fact that many of those people were working in informal markets, informal labor markets, because the sectors that are most touched by all of these types of transitions are agriculture, mining, transport, all of these have, especially in Latin America, Africa, and some parts of Asia, they're highly informal. And so we need to think about how we're going to not only reskill them, but make sure that where they end up is safe, socially protected, equal access, and so on.
And there is a lot of fear around at the moment, whether it's about AI or not enough jobs, migrants. We touched upon that subject, which I think needs no explanation really. But education is always put forward as a panacea to fear, and yet education, as we've already mentioned, takes a long time to kind of turn that ship around. But at the same time, we always have to be learning. I think that's what we've come to the understanding now, that our learning doesn't stop at school, if it ever did. But now going forward, we may have more than one career, maybe 3 careers in our time. Mahuran, if maybe I come to you on this, is in terms of how education, policy, labor markets, all of that intersect. How is that going? How's that experience been?
Yeah. Okay, I agree with you, because when we want to change the education, it takes some time, right? That is where the role of the private organizations is very important. The industry to come to the policy part and how they can work to frame what kind of skills needed. For example, like what our colleague mentioned in terms of AI. Okay, do we have the right skill needed on the AI, right? So that's where the organization, the private, they will identify, right, what the jobs that needs that skills, and come to the government and to the education, and we do the distance learning that is mentioned by our colleague. So we actually go line by line there. You can go together. So instead of we wait for the education system to change, okay, we keep quiet here. So I believe that we should go along together, change the education side. At the same time, the industry part, go together.
It seems to me that we're always going to be struggling to prove the worth of our policies if it always comes down to how many jobs have we created, how many jobs there are. And really, okay, if somebody goes through the education system all the way through to tertiary, there's not much they'll learn there when it comes to, say, a gig job like being an Uber driver. I mean, they've done how many years of education, and then they come out and do that, and they have to learn it on the job. Does there need to be more of a philosophy when it comes to how we approach labor markets and education, all of the other policies about prosperity, and the idea being that we have to allow every individual to thrive, and that will result in them being able to have a job or an income or a purpose or something that really makes a country strong and a region strong? Would you say so, Jason?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. I alluded a while ago to making sure these types of priorities seep up to the national development plans and national development strategies. And the reason I think that's one of the most important thing here is that that's where governments are able to prioritize at the highest levels and make sure they go down into the different lower levels. It's also where the resources come from. And we need resources for human resources, but also financial resources. And so making sure that this, green transition, for instance, is prioritized will mean that the education system will be calibrated for it. It means that the digital tech will be, the skills that we need for digital tech will be calibrated, and it will make sure that the different ministries are aligned on that as well. There's coherence across the government.
May I add?
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay. When you said about the gig job, okay, actually we're also managing the younger generations. I believe, globally we are managing the young generation where, okay, they prefer to have the gig jobs instead of in the office. Yes, yeah. It's experience. I mean, in our country, we also have that issues there. Okay. So now the issue is how we want to manage this group. Okay, the young, that looking at a different angle there, and how their preference and their needs will contribute to the economy of each country, and how we want to support them, in terms of the skill and what they like to do, and it will generate all those labor market there, very smart things there.
And maybe also just to add 2 thoughts, I think when we really think about the education policy, the skilling policy, really starting from first principles, as Jason said, I think is really important. We need to know what we're doing. The other part is really we need to think about the timeline. When we think about basic education, it's extremely important, but it will be very hard to be extremely specific because we just don't know what the future will look like in 20 years. But kindergarten kids or primary school students now are learning for the future in 20 years. So for this group, it will be important to get the basics right: literacy, numeracy, the socio-emotional skills, and basic digital skills for everyone. Probably not everyone needs to be a coder. Right now, we have some data, for instance, on Southeast Asia. Less than 5% of occupations, job offerings in Malaysia and Thailand, Vietnam, are for highly digital occupations. But at the same time, some level of basic digital skills is required in many, many jobs. So getting the basics right, preparing people to be learners, to adapt, to be able to take different kinds of jobs. And then for those already in the labor market where change are happening, I really think, as Jason mentioned, information is really crucial. It's really something where we need to have better systems, and that will require some government effort, because information is a public good, so the private market might not provide enough of it, to really give firms, workers, politicians, education providers a sense of where are shortages, where is the labor market headed. Maybe just one pitch, if I may. We've worked a lot on this in Indonesia. If you just Google Indonesia world-class labor market information systems, you will see a series of studies that the government of Indonesia and the World Bank have done together to really try to find what's the kind of information we can provide so that there's more smoother transitions for those already in the labor market.
You want to add something?
Yeah.
I thought so.
Does that look at Yeah. Also, in our country, we do have research. We call it the list of critical occupations. So the information that we gather from the industry, okay, what kind of skill and competency of each job, okay, what kind of skills that needed, yeah, for each job they want to perform the job. So from that information, it's being used as a reference by the educations and also all those vocational college, so that they can provide, the correct module and courses for the students, yeah, by Shetari or TVET college and also. I would say that it's a combination of work between the industry and also from the university and colleges, and plus, of course, the government who look into all those policy. Yeah.
Information sharing, raising awareness, public education programs about not just education, but the kind of jobs that are available and what you need to know, and understanding that technology is something that you're going to have to be comfortable with, not afraid of. That seems so simple, yet it can be frustratingly difficult, I imagine, to actually get this to be effectively done at all levels. I mean, is that a fair assessment?
I'd say yes, and I would also say that this is one of the reasons why mobility in this field, international migration, is really important, because the more you start. People have their own cultures and they have their own ways of working, and when you start changing country and then going back home, you start moving that information around, you start showing that there's value to investing in certain skills and certain shortage skills, and that has spillovers both in the host but also in the home country. And this is veering a little bit further away, but this is also something I fear and I feel is left out of this discussion, which is we focus on one country and we focus on how we might import that labor, but the whole thing needs to be seen as an ecosystem where those people one day will return, or they may return, they may want to return, and bringing those skills back home and the proliferation of those skills is exactly what's going to make regions, not just countries, but regions, grow in a direction that can create, supply and demand and fulfill jobs.
I think that's a good place to leave it, because unfortunately we're out of time. But please, thank you to all of you, of course, for being here. But please join me in thanking our wonderful panel for this discussion. Thank you so much.